Hello, and thank you for tuning in to Circling Dialogos and my conversation with Thomas Steininger. I will give some context for who Thomas is and a little bit for our conversation, which was amazing, in a moment, but first some housekeeping. So, I will let everyone know when the next Circling Dialogos course will be. The last two were amazing. I will keep you posted when we have the dates for that. The next thing that we have going on is a circling weekend, the Sovereign, which is the first stage of circling, and it's a 2-day experience. It's on Saturday the 30th and Sunday the 1st of April. So Saturday the 30th and Sunday the 1st of April. So if you're interested in diving into circling, I definitely would recommend the weekends are really the to get the true taste of the experience. It's really the weekends. We also have every Thursday an open event where anybody can come to, and that's a drop-in event. That's from 6 to 9 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And we are currently open for registration for the Art of Circling, which is our famous year-long circling course, which is kind of, you could say, if you really want to dive deep in the practice, go check that out. All the links for that is below. I also do one-on-one work with people. If you're interested in working with me one-on-one, go ahead and email me at guysengstock@gmail.com, and that's my email's below as well. All right. Thank you so much. And now to the conversation. So Thomas, I'm going to go ahead and just read his bio so you can get a sense of what he says about himself. Thomas has a PhD in philosophy, and he is the publisher of Evolve, the leading German integral magazine on consciousness and culture, as well as host of Radio Evolve, a weekly webcast in German and English. He speaks internationally on cultural evolution and the different spiritual and cultural currents that have formed our postmodern world. As a faculty member of Meridian University in California, he teaches about the principles of catalyzing emergence within collectives. For over 25 years, he has been developing the practice and philosophical foundation for a new human relatedness through a shift from individuation to trans-individuation, from the isolated I to the co-creative we. Together with Elizabeth DeBold, he has created the practice of Emergent Dialogue, an innovative we-space practice and pioneering experiment in conscious inquiry. So as you can get a sense, and I think this conversation you'll really get a sense of Thomas and how, when he talks about the pioneer in developing the philosophical foundation for this thing that he calls emergent dialogue is really what he is all about. And I initially was introduced to him through John. John wanted us to talk. And precisely one of the things that John was interested in, he thought it was fascinating that two people that came up with dialogical practices also have deeply studied and been influenced by Martin Heidegger's work. And so Thomas, who's German, really comes into this from an impressive depth in Heidegger's work, but also the depth in Heidegger's work from being in Germany, which is complicated, right? Because Heidegger's he's a problematic figure historically, for sure. So we cover that a little bit. in the following conversation, which I'll publish in a couple days from now, we go a little bit more into that part of it. But mostly in this one, I wanted to get a sense of Thomas's work, the kind of like the distinctions underpinning it, where he's coming from with it, the terminology, and so most of this particular one is really kind of exploring with him, getting what he's up to, and a little bit about what I've been up to, and the possibilities of some kind of convergence coming together and being a resource for one another, like personally, but also in terms of our practice. So I love this conversation. This will be the first of many. Enjoy. Sweet. So this is the first time we are meeting. I got introduced to you through John Vervaeke, and you were saying that like one of the things that was intriguing to John is that we both came up with and do inner work in the inner subjective. I've also heard it called the we space, and there's a Heideggerian connection there that I'm really curious about, and I think John was really like independently. We kind of came up with some. It sounds like we came up with some practices in the inner subjective realm, and somehow Heidegger's connected to that in some way. So we're just meeting each other, and I'm just hearing about your work, and I'm just curious. How did you shared a little bit about coming, you got your PhD in philosophy a few years back, and that you had connected Wilbur and Heidegger, which at the time was an unusual connection.
Very much so. It still is a very unusual connection.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, my thesis was about something that the German term Selbsterfahrung, which is difficult to translate into English,
mm-hmm.
but you can call it self-reliance or self-experience,
mm-hmm.
and cultural development.
Mm-hmm.
That's basically what my thesis was about. And I was at that time very much interested in the early forms of developing of stages of consciousness.
Oh, okay.
That's the connection to Wilber.
Yeah.
And I was very much interested in experience of being and understanding of being.
Yeah.
And this being dimension, at that time, particular also related to a Zen understanding of being, connection, understanding with Heidegger's understanding of being.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was the original connection point.
Right.
That there's something that our usual way of understanding reality does not touch, and there's something that got lost in the way we relate to the world.
Yes.
And which Heidegger expresses of our forgetfulness of the being dimension.
Right.
That at that time caught my interest, and that's how the whole thing started.
Yeah. And when was that? When did that catch your interest?
In the 1980s.
In the 1980s. And was this when you were in college?
That was when I'm in university in Vienna, yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, got it. So this is...
to be precise, put another dimension to it. Because in my university studies, I was very political, left-wing political, and I had a very strong Marxist background at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then I did a lot of psychotherapy and group processes, which basically kind of debunked a lot of Marxist thinking.
Got you.
Exactly.
They therapized Marx out of you.
In some way, and the way I started the thesis was basically it was a form of self-critique to understand the Marxist understanding of alienation.
Okay.
In a non-materialist way.
Yeah.
Basically opening up to the spiritual dimension, also in the relationship to the unconsciousness in the way Freud understands it, versus then how Siggy Jung understands it, because there's a huge difference between Freud's understanding of the unconscious and Jung's understanding. And then also going beyond the archetypes in something that is untouchable, which of course you can talk about in the Zen dimension. But at that time, I felt that Heidegger is touching something on that, coming from a philosophical point of view. That is a deep understanding of the alienation, not only of the individual, but also of our culture, our Western culture.
Yeah. You said before that, you said the untouchable. And then you started talking about, Heidegger seems to be connecting or opening up this dimension of being, right? And our connection with the world and the oblivionness, which connects with the alienation. Is it fair to say that did it feel like for you that when you started connecting with Heidegger, that he, in some sense, started to touch into the untouchable?
I think very much so. I mean, there's a lot to say about Heidegger because, of course, Heidegger is also problematic. In his own biography, his own involvement in the Nazi movement. There's a lot. There's a lot about Heidegger. It's not easy. It's not. But one thing that usually is overseen when people talk about Heidegger, that the young Heidegger starts with Meister Eckhart.
Right. Yeah. Big time. Right. Big time.
The academic discourse about Heidegger always forgets about that. That first, the time then around 1910 or so in the European culture was a time where Meister Eckhart got rediscovered. Meister Eckhart was mostly forgotten in European culture. And around 1900, there were some new translation from Middle German to High German of Meister Eckhart. And there was a whole kind of new discovery of Meister Eckhart's mysticism. And the early Heidegger, who studied theology, not philosophy in the beginning, he wanted to become a Jesuit.
Exactly.
He was very much into Meister Eckhart. And there's also one thing, at least the way I understand it, the big question of Heidegger in English, you usually translated the relationship between being and beings. Sein und das Seiende in German. There's a reference point to Meister Eckhart in this, because Meister Eckhart talks about God, and behind God, Godhood, Gottheit in German.
The godhood of God. Yes.
And I would say this Godhood, this is something with this untouchable that kind of middle-age mysticism touched on, and that Heidegger tried in the discourse of metaphysics to try to understand in a different way. And that's the connection between a deep understanding of presence in a beyond subject-object divide dimension, something like that. That was kind of where Heidegger was coming from. And that fascinated me, and that was the starting point of this.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, before we, what got you into being open to being and being open to these very deep things? When did that happen for you? How did that, when did you start to, when did you could say the ineffable start to tickle you?
Okay. If you go biographical like this, I also went to school in a Jesuit school in Austria.
You did? Okay, got you. So there's a connection. So there's a
connection that way also.
Yeah.
And at some point, that there was Jesuits are kind of an interesting order because they're sometimes very reactionary, sometimes also very progressive. They're very divided in themselves.
Yeah.
And I had a religion teacher in school who was very progressive, who started in the 1980s in this school a meditation room.
Oh, really? Oh, wow. In the 80s?
In the
that would have been just totally obscure.
Exactly.
Wow.
And at some point, he gave me a little booklet. I said, "You're already thinking enough." I was, I think, something 15 or 16.
Yeah.
Read this. And this little booklet was Zen and the Art of Archery.
What was it called?
Zen in the Art of Archery.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Zen in the Art of Archery. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Which at that point made no sense to me at all.
Yeah.
Kind of, because it's basically all about letting go of the I sense. It's basically
right.
How to do something without doing anything.
Yeah.
That's what this little book is all about.
Totally. Yes. Very Zen. Yes.
Very, very, very Zen, and I didn't get it at all. But it also never left me.
Yeah.
It never left me.
Right.
And then after that, I went very political, left-wing, rational. And at some point, I was very dissatisfied in university. I was in student unions with all this kind of stuff and did a lot of psychotherapy, body psychotherapy, Gestalt psychotherapy, did an education. I worked as a therapist myself for a time.
Yeah.
And in that, there were some deep experiences that did not connect with my kind of materialist understanding of reality, and I had to deal with that.
Yeah. Okay. Got you. So it was in the like a psychotherapeutic context, like an intersubjective context, that dialed you into something that your previous way of conceiving things couldn't hold up, right? And you being you, when that doesn't hold up, right, you can't just blow that off. That really strikes you.
At least it had a big effect on me.
Yeah.
And then, if you really want to go into my story, it also it had an effect. There was a controversial spiritual teacher. You maybe still know him, Andrew Cohen.
Oh yes, yeah. Yes. Yeah, Andrew Cohen.
So,
yeah, and he's kind of like loosely connected with Mark Gaffney, and
exactly.
he started. I saw a movie about him too.
Exactly.
About he's got a lot of controversy around him.
Oh yeah, rightfully so.
Yes, right.
But I was very intrigued by what he was doing. And I worked as a journalist in Vienna. I worked as a psychotherapist in Vienna, and I left everything behind and went to San Francisco for a couple of years.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, and then was very much involved in this community. And in this community, which also has a lot of troublesome stuff, in the end, it all flew apart.
And this community in San Francisco, was that Cohen? The Cohen community? Yeah,
the Cohen. But I was very much in it, and I was a very close student of Andrew.
Okay.
And a big part of what we did for a long time was also very serious meditation practice,
right,
and dialogue practice. So a lot, in spite of everything controversial, I learned a lot.
Yeah, because he was pretty militant in terms of like practicing day in, day out, and he's pretty like militant and fanatical about that. So I bet you got a lot of opportunity to practice.
You bet so.
Yeah. And what was that like? What was that like, starting to bring meditation and dialogue when you said practice dialogue in San Francisco with Cohen, like what does that mean? Did he have a practice, like a specific thing that you would do? Or
I mean, one of the things that I really still appreciate of Andrew is that he said there's something happening in between people that is more important than a relationship between the student and the teacher.
Yeah.
And this in-between space that we pursue together, an intelligence that arises out of the in-between space itself.
Yeah.
And part of the practice that we did hours, weeks and weeks, months and months of dialogue practice to allow this in-between space to come to its own. And we learned a lot of ways how it does not work.
Yeah. Totally.
And then also I stayed with Andrew in Massachusetts for some years when he moved to the East Coast, and then I came back to Germany, and then when also the more problematic side of what he was doing came out and the thing fall apart, we wanted to kind of continue what we thought was also a powerful ingredients of what we did in our own way in Germany. And that's how we developed our own work called Emergent Dialogue.
Oh, okay. Got it. So with so tell me a little bit about Emergent Dialogue. It's a great name. I would imagine is the name is, I assume, is very descriptive.
It's very descriptive. It really tries to point to what is really at the heart of what we try to do, which is collective emergence. And what it is really about is when people come together in any kind of presence, we usually come very much in self-related way. That means I come with my Thomas perspective and meet other people. And but the way I usually perceive reality is this Thomas perspective and with my own creativity and my own intelligence.
Yeah.
But when we look carefully, there's also something arises in any kind of coming together that it's its own wholeness.
Yeah. Right.
And this wholeness has its own intelligence that's more than my intelligence. It's held by all present, even more than all people present, because it's beyond people also, but it's also particularly held by all people present. And to the degree that this relational space becomes self-aware, the dynamic of coming together changes dramatically.
Yeah.
And that's what we try to pursue. And in fact, one way we started to call this is we call this also a process of transindividuation.
Transindividuation,
because what it needs is very mature human beings, very individual human beings, who are really standing also on their own feet, because otherwise a we space very easily can become kind of a group thing, where you're just taking over by pre-individuated powers, which can be powerful, but they don't hold the capacity of individuation.
Yeah. Is that kind of what you, where you learned a lot of what it wasn't with in Cohen's work? Yeah.
Yes. Exactly.
Yeah.
Because Cohen also very much was very identified with the guru position. And that on one hand had a powerful function, because to have a guru relationship means that you have a relationship to a human being who you somehow trust more than yourself.
Yeah.
Which can be very powerful and liberating, but it is also very easily open for abuse.
Right.
Same thing, both sides, same thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And my interpretation is that Andrew had a vision of something, but his being invested in the guru position was in the end in the way of the very thing that he envisioned.
Right. Right. Right.
And that was one reason why this fall apart. Not the only one, but one reason why this fall apart. I mean, it's my interpretation of it, but I really think so.
Right. Totally. So are you saying it's kind of like he couldn't, from your view, he couldn't be flexible when the group, like when the we space opened up, right? He couldn't let go of the guru.
Yeah.
The exactly. Guru space. Yeah, totally.
I even would go so far that in the end, Andrew was never in the we space. Mm-hmm. Really. Mm-hmm. Yeah. He was slightly apart in the guru position who was interested in the we space.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Which I also have to give him credit for, because he had a vision. There was something powerful, and I have to be grateful also, because I'm still owing him a lot.
Yeah, totally.
But there was a limitation in that was in the end decisive.
Totally. So it sounds like the thing that the key, what I'm hearing you say is that when the collective, you could say I come in with my perspective, you come in with your perspective, right? And then something opens up that is greater than the sum of the two of us.
Exactly.
That what you try to do in your work with Emergent Dialogue is it sounds like a big part of it is affording that other dimension that opens up, allowing it to become self-aware. And that you said that there's something about the self-awareness that does something really important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's very well put, because when we talk about it in the terms of we space, we space exists all the time.
Yeah.
If we are aware of it or if we are not aware of it, we are always in we spaces. Even if we are highly just separated individuals, fun enough, as a culture, we do this together.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
Even our separation, we do together.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But there's something in the quality of the we space that changes dramatically when it becomes self-aware.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the way I see it is similar like the individuation process itself. Because there's something about being an individual and not being aware that you are an individual. You see it in every child around 3, in the age of 3, before a child is able to say I.
Yeah.
And after, there's a tremendous shift in the realization, I am.
Yeah. Yeah.
The child was already before,
yeah.
But in the moment the child is able to say I am, the child changes because it becomes self-aware of its selfhood.
Yes, that recursivity opens up and it says I, right? Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. And then that's a whole different stage of life that opens up. That and I would say similar in a we space, we are always in a we space, but in the moment that the we space becomes self-aware through us.
Right.
Right. There's a similar transformative move in that.
Yeah. Yeah. So the I think the important thing I'm hearing you say with this is that it's not like we space. We space happens all the time.
Yeah.
But it's rare for it to happen and for it to become recursive onto itself. And that's the important part, that where it starts, the possibility of development opens up.
Yeah.
Right.
And if I may add one element, because the self-awareness is the first step in this.
Yeah.
But there's a second step, because the self-awareness of the V-space allows also the opening up of the care for this V-space. In fact, that's the whole point.
Yeah.
That we as individuals, in the moment that we become aware of this V-space as itself, we can start to care for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that changes the dynamics.
Yeah.
Where it's about the potentiality between us that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Not so much what my agenda is or your agenda, the potentiality of coming together, of being related, of the wholeness of presence.
Right.
That really becomes the interesting thing.
Right.
And then a form of intelligence and creativity opens up that is of a different dimension.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you're so it's there's a recursivity, right? It becomes, which is be interesting. I have some questions about how you know when that happens and what that kind of looks like, right? So there's the sense of the we space that may be happening all the time, but it doesn't become self-aware. In that moment of self-awareness, then comes the possibility of caring for it. Mm-hmm. Right. So we as individuals can become to get oriented towards this other intelligence that's beyond, like includes us, but is also beyond us. So we can we could mutually start to care for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. And so yeah, go ahead.
And maybe to add one other element, because the caring even can become the quality of disidentification of my separate self-sense. It seems that if this is kind of just an image or a reality, it can be discussed, but that's how it looks like, that you see through these eyes of the space itself, like you would see through different eyes. It's not just eyes, Thomas, see what's happening, but you look from the inside of this wholeness. Right. And I'm just describing the phenomenology of it. Not saying that it is reality, but that's how one experiences it. You look from a different perspective, and the way I interpret it is that there's a disidentification from a separate self-sense.
Yeah.
And a capacity to see through the process itself, this collective process.
Yeah.
And one point where it at least seems very obvious that this is the case, that people seem to share experiences in this way that can be very surprising. So there's some insights opening up, and I'm sure you know this from your work. Somebody is voicing something, and others basically would have said the same thing at the same minute. It doesn't matter anymore who is saying it, because it is in the room, it is in the space.
Right, totally. Well, that just, that just in itself, right, where that sense of we all would have said the same thing, and we let go of the attachment of who says it. The sense of owning, So there's a different orientation, and what you said phenomenologically, what that experience is like is one in which I'm no longer just seeing with my own eyes from my own personal sense of self, but I start to have an experience of it's as if I'm seeing with the eyes of the in-between, or the whole, right? The sense of the wholeness. Thus there's a shift from my own personalized consciousness, right? Or perspective into this third perspective, and that I'm actually able to see from it, which is well, I would imagine this is kind of one of the benefits of the practice, right? Is what probably what a lot of people do it for, is because it evolves. It's kind of like a developmental leap, right? To go from just seeing with my own eyes to seeing with the space of the between, right? Like that I'm including a lot more of my awareness, becomes more whole.
Exactly. And it also, there's a sense of non-separation in that. So one also could call it a practice of of shared non-separation of what's happening. That's part of what's very exciting about it. Usually when people tap into that, it's extremely thrilling. There's something very powerful in that, which is good. There's also danger in that because it can become kind of a distraction, kind of being the excitement in itself. It can become an attraction, but it can be also very motivating. And
ecstatic in the in the way that Heidegger talks about it, like the literal ecstatic, to stand out exactly. Of, right? Yeah.
And that, as you're touching on Heidegger, I see this very much related to what Heidegger calls the middle Heidegger or late Heidegger, the Ereigniskultur.
Interesting.
Which is so difficult to translate into English. Enrollment or event, but basically presence coming to its ownness. By letting it happen.
Right.
Because there's a certain Wu-Wei relationship to that, where you're not passive, but you're also not kind of an independent agent. It's a surrendering and being active at the same time move. In this. And my interpretation is that of what Heidegger was searching for in this Ereignis as being beyond the subject-object divide. Is very related to this form of practice.
Right.
So it may be a little big to say, but I experience it a little bit as a practical form of Heideggerian experiments.
That makes a lot of sense to me.
Of Ereigniskultur. And one thing that later Heidegger writes a lot, and there are many people who appreciate Heidegger say that's too much. It's when he's talking about the fourfold.
Right.
Where basically even Heideggerian people usually say the fourfold. That's a little out there where he's going. I find this fourfold tremendously powerful as an understanding of what's happening in the real space. Because he talks about in the fourfold this four dimension of reality, and he calls it earth and sky and immortals and the divinities. And the way I understand it is that every present moment has a dimension where this moment stands on. It's just everything that brings this moment into actuality.
Right.
Like we having come to this Zoom call, our capacities to speak English, our culture, everything this moment stands on is what holds this moment. And in realization of that, there's an opening to what this very moment is open to, the potentiality of that.
Oh, interesting. So
which I understand as the sky moment. What is this moment open to? It's always about the presence. What the potentiality of this moment is? What's possible out of where we are standing here right now? That really is the opening of this and only this. In the ongoing presence.
So it's this relation where you're when I'm let's see if I can follow this thread. So it's a sense of presence that becomes, in some sense, is it fair to say, becomes aware of its own self-standing, right? And in a certain sense, in that becoming aware of its own self-standing, it is synonymous with it opening up.
It becomes aware of its own opening. The awareness of the standing and the awareness of the opening are two sides of the same thing.
The awareness of the standing and the awareness of the opening are two sides of the same thing. Yeah, because there is this element with Heidegger, and what I like about the fourfold is it's a real participatory thing, right? It's like, because it's not just it. In some sense, it's a real accomplishment for the fourfold to come together and to be, right, and that every part of the fourfold is folding into itself. It's really, he's got that element where you can feel him really struggle at, like, with in that work to find a way of talking about this primordial experience, right? Yeah. That is, yeah, yes.
I mean, it's maybe also helpful that at the very time when he was working with the fourfold, that was also the time where he was translating the Tao Te Ching into German.
Oh, he translated the Tao Te Ching into German? I didn't know that, really. Wow.
He translated. It's not published yet. It's still in the archives. It's also unfinished. But together with the Chinese students, that's how we know, because the Chinese student he translated it with told about it.
Oh, interesting.
He had a very strong interest in the Tao Te Ching, at the time. Yeah. And also in the Zhuangzi, the Taoist philosopher Zhuangzi. He read a lot. Yeah. So, and in Taoism, this relationship between earth and sky play a certain role. I don't know how much this is really related. It's just kind of my own interpretation. But it is around the same time that he was trying to work with this language to explain his own thinking in a different way that goes beyond Western European metaphysics.
Yeah, absolutely. And specifically, like the Western, because the Western European, well, I'll ask you this. How is what you're describing with Erasmus different than Western Europe, like Western metaphysics? Like, what's the thing that's fun, like that makes what you're describing distinct from that? What can't Western metaphysics do that Erasmus can do?
It transcends the subject-object divide.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of what Heidegger tries to think is how to be able to go beyond the subject-object divide. That on one hand starts with Descartes, with the awareness, I think, therefore I am. But with Heidegger, much earlier on with Plato, where he makes this distinction between the world, the material world, and the world of ideas. This kind of separation between the material world and the world of ideas, where everything becomes something that we imagine as an object in the ideas. And there's something in this Western metaphysics, this division of reality into two. That he thinks that before Socrates, people like Heraclitus were touching still in a kind of non-division way. But in the process of becoming conscious, not only for the bad, there was good reasons to do that, but there was a price to pay for that. So it's not that we should never have done that. It's just to be aware of the price that we have to pay to go through this all. That there is this kind of the world of ideas and the world of the material, and then in the development of subjectivity, starting with Socrates already, but Augustine, and then of course people like Luther and Descartes, where the subjectivity becomes so much what the Western thought is about. And in the end, we all have the separate subjects that our individuality is about, and how to get out of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's so what you're saying is that with the we space is becoming, and it becoming aware of itself, that moment of it being self-aware and a concernful relation opens up there.
Yeah.
You're saying that you sense that this is very much what Heidegger was starting to get at with Ereignis and the fourfold and that whole thinking, that it's almost like you're like, I think this is what Heidegger was sensing, and that what you've been doing with the emergent dialogue work is almost like a practical Heidegger in that sense.
That's my understanding of it. I mean, one has to be careful with it, but still, that's my understanding of it.
Yeah. That just makes a lot of sense, because it's interesting. How do we go about, even describing or talking about, or what is the right way of speaking and responding to that dimension that opens up, that is, that when this third factor happens, right?
Exactly.
Like, and it becomes self-aware, and how do we attend to it, right? Just like what you're saying, it's like in how do we attend to it in such a way that attending is an acknowledgement of what it's standing on, which is its own self-standing, that is also an opening to more of it, right?
Exactly.
This is that strikes me as that requires a very, very different way of languaging, right?
Which I think is exactly also the problem that Heidegger was battling with, and what he was experimenting with.
Yeah.
Because he was not necessarily a very humble guy. But he said something that one has to give him credit for. He said that what he tries to think is not what this is all about. It's just trying to prepare to be able to think about this. So he himself had, in that point, the humility to say the thought process that I'm going through is just trying to lay the ground to be able to start to think about something that goes beyond where we are right now. And part of all this strange languaging that he did, but in my understanding, was an experimenting how language can go somewhere else than where language has been before. And some of it, what he did worked, and some of what he did not work, but it was quite an endeavor.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you, like, in your practice and the way that you practice it, kind of like from, like, what does it look like? What are some of the, do you have like particular things that you have people start to say? Do you have like a ceremonial sense to it? Are there, like, what are some of, like, what if I were to walk in on you guys doing an emergent dialogue practice, like, what kinds of things would I see here you guys doing?
Depends in which context. Because the different forms of this dialogue. One I would call an investigation of the we space itself, where we just talk about what this capacity is about. Basically, it's an ongoing investigation of this presencing as it occurs. And that is just trying to make aware of the occurrence of the intersubjective, and also be very aware how this is an experience and not an idea. And and then to be able to investigate this shared experience in its different aspects.
Yeah.
And that is very much the core of the practice, which is basically trying to work that this space becomes more self-aware through actively investigating the space itself.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And the other part of the practice, which is more the application, is to be able to talk about whatever and not forget about the space.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is more difficult to do so.
Yeah.
And part of what we're doing, and that maybe for the good or for the bad, I don't know, is that there is in some way no ceremonial context at all.
Yeah.
But to just to come in and be present.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure. Maybe it would be good to kind of stay, because there's power to ceremony, in opening in space and closing in space and making some ritual that allows something. But there's also something, a danger in the ritualization, that it makes it more artificial, less natural.
Right. Right.
And I'm kind of wandering between one and the other, and obviously more leaning into the spontaneous occurrence.
Yeah.
Spontaneous meaning conscious spontaneous occurrence.
Yeah.
In that sense, from the outside, it looks like there is no real ritual then besides just being present and trying to calm this. And usually it helps when some of the people present are aware of the space and are able to open up the space in a direct or indirect way. And then it's always, as soon as the space opens up, it creates its own currency.
Yeah.
It creates its own frequency. There's a kind of a gravity shift in that all of a sudden it becomes so obvious that even people who are not used to that at all are able to kind of shift the gravity field from one to the other. Although on their own they would not be able to go there, but because the gravity field is strong enough, the shift is possible.
Right.
And then people are able to see that the space looks different from there.
Yeah.
And in that, you create also a kind of an awareness, even a memory that allows to stabilize this as a possibility in consciousness and culture to come together in a different way.
Yeah. 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 Interesting. So there's one point. So what you're saying is that there's one point where there's one way of doing it where you come and you actually investigate the phenomena, right?
Yeah.
Of it. And in investigating it, being aware that becoming aware of it as the process of investigating it, right? And opening to it. And then the other way is just getting together and in some sense not doing anything in particular, but just noticing, because this is basically what I'm hearing you say is that the key sounds like the key turning point is that we space just happens, and it happens all the time. In fact, we kind of dwell, like we're dwelling in a we space, right, of intelligibility of our own culture. I mean, multiple dimensions of that we're kind of almost we all the way down, so to speak. But it's this move of becoming aware of it and it becoming aware of itself, which is the key. And so there's another way, which is the way that you most like, because it's part of it's a lot more natural. And just staying open to that and discovering it as it just happens naturally, and relating to it, being conscious of it. Interesting. Yeah.
And then it also can become much more part of everyday culture, because you don't need a ritual setting to open this up.
Yeah.
You just need consciousness to open this up.
Yeah. Yeah.
In fact, in the practice that we are doing, I mean, we're doing several things, but one thing one could say is a separation is one is kind of a practice where we do this investigation. And we also run in German a magazine called Evolve, a magazine for cultures and culture, where we talk about things from a meta-modern perspective and bring people and try to hold the magazine already investigating kind of the edge of where culture goes.
Right.
And we have in the German-speaking countries around 25 to 30 Evolve salons, we call, where readers come together and just talk about the different authors that we bring in the magazine and the different content that we bring. And there we work with our dialogical practice, but we don't teach it. And we just try to hold the space there. And it works in different cities in very different degrees, because some people are very connected to us, some people are just doing their own thing. So it's very diverse in what's really happening there.
Yeah.
But what we try to be able to talk about whatever in a different emergent way. And one way to describe what we try to achieve there, we call to create a synergetic intelligence.
What did you say that again?
To create a synergetic intelligence.
The synergetic intelligence.
There's something where I come with my perspective, you come with your perspective, he comes with, and we have all our own thoughts. But if there's an intuition where all what we bring can synergize, the perspective becomes multidimensional.
Yeah. Yes.
But it needs awareness and a care for the synergetic factor, where all of a sudden the whole process crystallizes in a different way because it comes in a synergetic form.
Yes. Yes.
And then the differences, seeing something in a different way, can flow in a very different way, because part of what in that context I find most interesting and also productive for culture is that there is a creative friction where I have a perspective and you have a perspective and we really disagree.
Yeah.
Because I don't understand what you're saying and you don't understand what, and that's it. And this is usually the point where conflict starts.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
But when there's enough awareness of this space and this synergetic possibility, this creative friction is exactly the point where when we don't fragment, something creative can come out that I'm not able to think, you were not able to think, but in holding it together, a completely different point becomes visible, exactly because of the friction.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's always very cool, because there insights happen that I'm not able to access on my own.
Right.
And we are only able to do that if we think together in this way.
Yeah.
And that's something that I find just a very powerful thing. But it needs this awareness of the we space, and it needs this intuition for synergy that allows this to be more likely to happen. There's no guarantee for it, but it allows it to be more likely to happen.
Right. I mean, it sounds like, in some sense, it sounds like you're talking about the way dialectic works.
Yes. As John would say, not in the Hegelian sense, but more in the Socratic sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Where that, and that friction becomes something, because I could imagine in some way, right, like that friction becomes, with this context that you're talking about, right, it becomes something that's wanted.
Yeah, exactly, because it's exciting.
Yeah, and it'd be kind of it'd be a bummer if like we just didn't have it or something like that, right? Yeah.
It can be really the fun part. And the not understanding can be something really exciting to dive into because of this potential of something that can emerge there. That is out of reach for myself.
Right. That's really interesting. So this thing, you have there's a bunch of groups in Europe with the Evolve publication that you have.
Yeah.
Right. Where people get together and they discuss what's going on in the publication with this sense to it, right?
To some degree, to be honest, that varies very much in different cities because everyone who wants to make an Evolve salon, they just can do that. And they can get our support if they want, but if they don't want, they do their own thing. But wherever they want, we help them to hold the dialogue in this more synergetic way. And try to lift the conversation this way.
Interesting. Really.
And we see this as a kind of a contribution for the dialogical culture in the German-speaking countries.
Right. Really interesting. And so do you have a salon that you've been doing pretty consistently with the same group of people, or?
Yes, we have several salons that go on since many years, and we have also some practice groups that do more the inner work of that do this already more than 10 years or so.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What are those groups like? What's your experience?
In fact, we just had a weekend last weekend here in Frankfurt with a core group of ours, which I found I was very excited about what happened. Because we're just together exploring, and there are always new dimensions coming up in our shared understanding how this different perspective can be enacted and lived.
And what was, like, for example, what were some of the dimensions that opened up for you this weekend? Like, what were some of the things that struck you?
One thing that I found really for our work kind of a landmark is we talked about the shared experience of a shared intersubjective space. But what emerged in the space between us was also an awareness of the collective sense organ that is able to perceive this, which is different because at least the way I interpret it, there's a certain sense organ of perception that allows to see that. And even the sense organ is not an individual one. It's not a sense organ I have. But it's a sense organ that emerges between us as a whole. So we are dependent on each other for the sense organ to be able to sense. And that's different. That's different than the space, because it's the muscle that you work with. It's not the weight that you lift, but it's the muscle that you lift with.
So is it kind of like, it got this picture of, in some sense, that the sense organ and what the sense organ senses co-arise.
Yes,
but
there's something when you're not only aware of what arises, but you're also aware of the sense organ that allows you to have a more conscious relationship to working the muscle. There's more maturity in that. Because you know what to flex in order to be able to these different dimensions to emerge. So that's something we talked quite a bit about this week.
It's funny. It's because it's interesting. This is where there's a way, especially in the later Heidegger, where he's talking a lot about this it's so difficult to talk about some of this stuff, but the and I'm getting this, and as you're describing, I'm getting it. I'm getting it in a sense just by understanding what you're saying. There's a way where a big part of, like, so for example, when Heidegger talks about truth, right, aletheia, right, I always, when I first got interested in Heidegger and I started understanding what he was talking about with aletheia, just truth as the event of unconcealment, right? Mm-hmm. And I thought, like, what I thought that was really about was what was concealed. But my sense is, as time's gone on, is more like, I think what he's really getting at is that it's actually what gets unconcealed is concealment, right? That there's something that stays hidden, yet that hiddenness can be revealed, right? In some way that's like that what it can be, like that hiddenness or concealment can be revealed in a way that doesn't take away its unconcealedness, right? There's something about the way that you're talking about this that gives me that sense of, like, the way that something withdraws, but it does something as it withdraws, and that something it does, you can kind of, in some sense, bring out, right?
And the way I would understand it, because it stays hidden in the way that you cannot objectify it.
Yeah, exactly.
It is basically what allows you to perceive whatever, but in itself, it's not perceivable as any kind of object.
Yeah, right.
But it is exactly this where objects appear.
Yeah.
And that's where I see it connected to a meditative experience of presencing, emptiness, openness.
Yeah.
Which you cannot objectify. I mean, as soon as you do that, you make something with it that it's not what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And this is also where you have to let go of all metaphysics, metaphysics in that sense, because that's exactly what we did. We creating this whole universe of what can be perceived.
Yeah.
But there is a place where this perception comes from, that we are already in, and that can be in a way conscious, but not in the way that we usually think consciousness works. Because consciousness, as being aware of something, is not what it is.
Yeah. Whatever that is, like, what I'm kind of getting is, there's kind of a way, what I'm imagining is staying in that, or like dwelling in that sweet spot, right, of an awareness of not something, right, but it's not an object that I can know or grasp or have, yet it has a constituting element to it.
Say more about the constituting element.
Something about this, what I keep kind of getting, I'm imagining in what you're describing, that there's there's a way of abiding. There's a way of abiding, and bringing something, affording something to come into presence, right? Without making it as something, right? But that that's the practice, isn't it?
That's what I would say is the practice. And in that sense, I would see those as a form of collective meditative practice.
Yeah.
And something that allows us to be very conscious, but in a way where the usual separation that consciousness means, in the way we individuated and became subjects, is also left behind.
Yeah.
How much I'm putting this on Heidegger, I don't know, but that's my understanding, and it's definitely kind of related both to the meditation experience and meditative practice, and my interpretation of Heidegger in the light of this.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And it's also, I mean, this interesting fact that a lot of East Asian philosophers, particularly of the Kyoto school, who have some of the refinest understanding of Zen, are so interested in Heidegger, where they see a connection point where there's a dialogical possibility between the whole Western philosophy and the practice of Zen. And there is something where I think also intercultural dialogue between these meditative practices, which I would call the Wu-Wei practices, maybe, just to simplify, because it's Taoist Zen, something that is cultivated in the East Asian development of human consciousness in a way that we did not. And that seems to be relevant in where we want to go right now in human consciousness as a whole.
Totally. Okay, I have to run to the bathroom. Can I pause just 1 second? Yeah, I'm going to the bathroom. 1 second. There we go.
May I ask you a question?
Yeah, please.
As you kind of heard a little bit, at least how I see our work, something that I was thinking about, the relationship between emergent dialogue and circling, that I just would like to see if that somehow resonates with you or not. Because the way I experience circling, and as you know, I only know it from afar, have never really participated in that, is that what you really cultivated is a depth of this I-thou relationship in this.
Yeah.
So there's a very strong Buberian side to the circling.
Yeah.
Which somehow is a different emphasis of what emergent dialogue does. And somehow I see that part of the weaknesses of emergent dialogue, and also the possible shadow sides of emergent dialogue, is to oversee the I-thou importance in the we space.
Yeah.
Because in the end, it needs the full capacity of both at the same time to really flourish.
Yeah.
And the way we developed it, and that's also back to the time with Andrew Cohen and that time in Latinx community, really had a full emphasis to go, we even call it this way, to the impersonal, and to stay in the impersonal. And to some degree, I think it was very powerful, because it allowed to reach a different ground that, particularly in the post-modern culture, is a huge violation of what our culture is about, to really honor the personal. But it also had to do with some of the troubles we ran into. Let's put it that way. And I see that there is a kind of a possible reciprocity in the development of the focus of circling and the focus of emergent dialogue.
Yes.
Because of the different emphasis, but as I heard and as I hear you also right now, you have a deep understanding and appreciation of the V space as such. That is our focus point. It is. So there is a mutual understanding of the different emphasis.
Yeah.
And in that sense, a complementary capacity can be there that allows to kind of work also with what the possible less developed parts, at least on our side, have. Because I'm sure because we emphasize this so much, although at least in my thinking, there is also the attempt to not miss out on the other side at the same time.
Yeah.
But still, that is our emphasis.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate it because the sense I'm getting is well, one, I'm noticing and talking with you about the dimensions that open up and that you play in, right, in emergent dialogue, there's just in saying what I'm hearing requires a different relationship to my own speech, right? There's like a slowing down and just the exercise of talking about what I'm present to without making it a thing, right? Just that exercise is a really important place to stand, right? And to get to know. And that's, in some sense, feels very Heideggerian to me in that way. And I think I can kind of hear what you're saying too, is like the thing that it doesn't quite emphasize that you're thinking that could be maybe even like maybe a weakness of it is similar. I hear that criticism with Heidegger, actually, of his later work, right? There's this kind of place where people kind of don't. Is there really anything there, right? I think that they talk about it, right? So there's like, I see some parallels with that. Yeah.
I see it the way, which is also exactly the difference between the early Heidegger and the late Heidegger, because the early Heidegger of Sein und Zeit is very much about the Dasein,
right,
which is the Dasein and the with-Sein. That emphasizes this radical existential approach to reality.
Right.
That you can connect with Buber in that way. That he stopped because he felt misunderstood. He felt that he never wrote the second part of Sein und Zeit because he thought the way it got picked up, people basically don't get what he tries to do. And then he changed radically his tone in order to emphasize the other side when he started to talk about the history of being.
Totally. I mean, I think it's interesting for me, at least my experience of circling. It's like I've always been the one that's been interested in Heidegger, right? In the like historically in working with circling, I've always been the one that's kind of like, for some reason, been struck by the philosophia sense of it, right? But I found that other people weren't at all interested in that most of the time, right? So it's a lot of my I would say a lot of where Heidegger, because I started reading Heidegger right around the same time that circling started. And I think that I had no background in philosophy, right? I had like learning disabilities and I had a hard time with reading and dyslexia and a bad childhood and all that stuff, right? So it was unlikely for me to to kind of pick up philosophy, but I did right around the same time, and I started reading, being in time at the Barnes and Noble across the street, which is a bookstore here in America, while I was at art school full time, and I'd read Heidegger, right, and then I'd go and circle, and then I would come back and I'd read Heidegger and I'd go and circle, really? Right, yeah, and I really didn't understand. Like I was aware of that I didn't understand a lot of what I was reading, but something was really compelling for me, and I came to realize later that what it took to try to understand Heidegger was really what it ended up being, was kind of the point, right? It's like to understand what Heidegger was saying, or I should say attempt to understand, right, had me have to step outside of my own point of reference, right, and look back, right, from an awkward stance or an awkward foot back on what I was trying to read, and just doing that over and over and over and over and over again, I think helped me a lot to really start to be able to start to be able to see this really close in place, right? This kind of before subjectivity, this kind of really, that thing that's concealed in its nearness, right? And that hermeneutic phenomenology of going around in circles in that way, there's something about that was almost like a yoga for me. Like it was like a sensory motor intellectual kind of coordination of a yoga that helped to reveal this kind of dimension that we're already underway in. It's deeply constituting, right, of myself and everything else, yet in its constituting, it also constitutes itself as concealed. And that kind of looking, in some sense, trying to I wrote a poem that exemplifies this. Is like, it says, "Is that you, God, sitting just behind my eyes as I look for you walking in circles?" Right. And that glimpse that there is a dimension, right, that is so near, that it could be almost oblivious to us, but that it's also what's most constituting of us. Just that seeing that, or that orientation, or what, because I think that's in some sense what Heidegger is constantly pointing to, right? Is this thing that's concealed in its nearness, right? I don't know how else to put it. And then I think that dimension that can open up when I would circle with people, that's what I would start to see, right? Is that, and that's kind of seeing what helping to see and listen in such a way that you can start to hear what that person was seeing with, right? That was so near to them, that they couldn't see it. And then getting into relationship about that particular place ended up being a place of deep intimacy, like personal intimacy, interpersonal intimacy, really. And so I would say that that's how Heidegger really influenced me personally, and as we were developing circling, how circling developed in that sense, right? So this whole sense, for example, there's some of the vernacular of circling is this sense of getting, we call it getting someone's world, really deeply getting somebody, or getting somebody's world, right? This whole sense of, right, that people have a world, right, and a background and a foreground, and to get someone's world is not to get or understand or come into relationship with what they necessarily would say or talk about, but it's what would have them say everything that they would say or talk about. Mm-hmm. And in some sense, that deep intimacy of that thing that's closer to them than themselves, mm-hmm. that and coming into relationship with that, bringing language to that, and seeing that and experiencing that. A lot of people would call that the experience of being deeply seen, right? Mm-hmm. In some way, and like deep by and I think this is one of the things that I realized is, because I had this question for a long time, like, what's the difference between when people talk about being seen? What's the difference between that and being narcissistically reified, right? I knew that there was a difference, but I didn't really understand why. And like, when I looked at it, I started to realize, like, oh, like with narcissism, for example, right? There's a sense in which I already understand in some sense, I already know what I need to be reflected as, right? Like, there's no discovery there. Mm-hmm. The sense of when people talk about being deeply seen, it usually comes from where we come into relationship with what is in some sense the most constituting, right, and determinate of you, right? Mm-hmm. Yet you didn't quite ever realize before, right? Mm-hmm. It's that experience of like when we come into relationship with that, whatever that dimension is, mm-hmm. that's where people go, oh, they feel deeply, deeply, deeply seen. And it has I've come to realize that it's almost like people are walking around. It's almost like this experience of people are walking around being seen deprived in some sense. There's a real need for that. In that way, yeah.
That's very fascinating, because the way I hear you is being seen in this way. I'm seeing before my self-identification,
yeah,
in my world.
Yeah.
Because before I identify with whatever my world is and my role in that,
yeah,
there's already that holds that.
Yeah.
But that is empty of my identification. Yeah. But if you see me in that before that, mm-hmm. in some way, you liberate me from that.
Right.
Identification.
Exactly. Well said. Very, really well said. Yeah.
That's very powerful, because it's me, but it's not the way I hold me.
Yeah. Yes.
And that allows me to see me in a way that's free, at least to some degree, from the way I'm holding myself.
Yes.
And the distortion that comes with that.
Yes.
And in that sense, I'm seen deeper than I can see myself usually, because it comes from this holding on to whatever this narcissistic holding on to is.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's like, it's almost in some sense, it's seeing whatever it is that it's the gathering, right? It's the gathering that's beyond what's gathered, right? Mm-hmm. But always recedes. Yeah. So in that, whatever that look, mm-hmm. granting that look of you and responding to that, and like, right, becomes something. It ends up becoming something that is that we end up both. It's like there's this quality of just seeing, in some sense, your logos, right? Mm-hmm. And having that insight is always an insight that we have, right? Together. It's not like I'm doing something to you, but it's something like when we have it together, it's a very intimate kind of experience that can be really, really mm-hmm. transformative for a lot of people. And it's also, somehow it just connected the heart. Like that's the big, I think the big thing. And I'm imagining what your sense of circling is in some sense is this I thou connection is it seems to really call forth and speak to like the heart.
Yeah. But you just brought something forth that I haven't seen that way before. And in fact, it's very powerful. And it also makes sense why concealment it seems to be an important term in Heidegger, because that's what's holding it.
Yeah.
And and to kind of touch underneath that allows to free something, and first to be seen, but also from then some different potentiality to arise out of that, because then there's a free flow also happening with that basically is beyond the holding of identity that's always become static in some way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's really well said. I really like the way that you said that. Yeah, it's like something about, it's like the concealment is what does the heavy lifting of holding everything together, right? And it withdraws into the thing it's holding, right? But if you can kind of like, in some sense, I guess it's in some sense it's talking about the dimension of, it's like talking about, but it's not talking about, right? It's presencing that dimension, right? And I think it's very close to whatever that dimension is the same dimension of like this deep care, right? And I think it's also kind of like that there's that the way that it gets presenced seems like it can it must be I can in some sense I can only hear your deepest humanity with my own. All right, in that sense. So it's both of those are presenced, and it's very connected to this deep sense of caring, which is seems like that quality of caring and being seen in this deep way, that gets unconcealed in this inner subjective sense of love, right? That I think that people talk a lot about is really, really missing, right, in a big way.
That is powerful, because what you say about love and being seen also translates for me. There's a witnessing capacity in that, where you see me, you seeing me also transcends my self-isolation, because being seen means who I really am is already in relationship. In being seen.
There it is.
And that's a very human reality, because basically in that sense I cannot separate myself from you as you see me, because I have to acknowledge to be seen. And that changes something about me, because I'm not isolated in that. Even as I am, I'm already seen.
Yes.
And that's a powerful thing.
Right. And that dimension, you did something. I appreciated that turn that you just made right there, of like that you acknowledged something that I think was really astute, is that, like if I have this experience of being seen by you, what that experience acknowledges is that seeing is already underway, right? That I'm already, it's not, I think what you really did a great job of just expressing, I appreciated this, is it's not like I go from isolated to then coming together. In that acknowledgement of seeing, I presence a domain in which there's all, and you find yourself already together, right?
Yeah. You acknowledge something that already is, and that's different than coming together.
Yeah. There it
because
is.
The coming together still holds the possibility of being isolated.
Yeah.
But being seen already allows me to see that we are already not separate.
Yeah.
And that's a very different reality.
Yeah. And now we start to get into like that starts to reveal kind of an ontological sense of that way of it's kind of like it's a I don't know, a non-metaphysical sense of being, right?
Mm-hmm. It's very powerful because it's definitely a very different focus point than where we go with the Emergent Dialogue. But I'm kind of taken by that. It opens up a world of non-separation in acknowledging also the difference of the worlds that are meeting in this.
Yeah. Totally.
So it's not just basically, we are one. There's a full appreciation that I'm really with another world, but the world is with me.
Yeah. Yes.
And that's a kind of a magic thing. In fact,
yeah, totally. It's not just you, me, you come together, and then we create this third thing from our own resources. But there is a way where we can talk about it like you and I come together, and then we walk together and a relationship unfolds, right? Or is created. But I think that what we're talking about here, I also think what you're talking about in your work, as far as I can tell, is very similar in this way of like, there's also a way that we could talk about how we're already related, right? That we're already underway in a relationship. And that when we bring that deeper sense, we're starting to acknowledge something that's like more primordial, right? In that way. And I think this is one of the things you kind of hear these like common of the last 25 years, some things that I hear all the time when people come and do circling, these things that people say over and over and over again. It's uncanny. Is they're like, I had no idea I could have a connection like that with somebody like within 5 minutes, right? Mm-hmm. Like that I haven't had with my husband or my mother, or I hear that over and over and over again, right? And
it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And so there's something about that just like, and I think the insight or the wonderment that's opened up when people talk about that, I would imagine is what they're speaking to is that there's a dimension, there is a dimension that's closer to me. It's like, it's so neat. It's like there's something really close, and I kind of missed it up until now, but I realized it was already there, right? Already there, in that like you and I could get together and we could have this kind of experience of intimacy like that, like something's closer than I thought that it was. And there's something about just that recognition that I think that you pointed out that is deeply, it's almost like a spiritual insight for people.
Wow. Because I'm really wondering also, playing with the practices I know it and what I hear from you, and also are experiencing the difference in the connection point. There is something also in the appreciation of the uniqueness of the worlds, to really deeply appreciate this unique world I'm already connected to as I'm with you in dialogue, that really appreciates this very fact that there's something very you that I'm able to meet in this presence right now.
Yeah. Yes.
While the focus of Emergent Dialogue is very much appreciating the wholeness that this is emerging in.
Yeah.
Which is a different orientation, but even when I say it, the atmosphere changes from the wholeness.
What did you just sense? Can you describe that a little bit? That sense of change?
There's something that is holding us, that is opening up.
Yeah.
And there's the depth of your you-ness opening up when I follow what you were saying. And they're both in a relationship, and they are also not separate from each other, but they're also in a dialectical relationship with each other.
Yeah.
In that sense, I find this different emphasis and the relationship and how they can hold each other.
Right.
Because there's something in appreciating the wholeness, and there's something in appreciating the uniqueness. That's both very profound. And how to do this in a way that is not a kind of going halfway, but having both at the same time.
It's funny as you're talking about seeing this the difference of emphasis, and then in some sense seeing how that they're linked in ways that seem really, really exciting. Right? But they're also different. So funny, as that started happening, I just noticed that I hadn't noticed, like a sense of feeling closer to you.
Interesting.
And I think what it is like the thing I'm appreciating about you is just, well, one is that you have your eye on something that I can sense you've had your eye on it for a long time. And that I think what I feel in that is something like and I want to get closer to it. There's a sense of like, there's seeing it, but then there's how I see it is by wanting to get closer to it is like, whatever it is that you've just been caring about all these years, right? That has you open to even this conversation, to Heidegger, there's something really, really rich about you, and unique. And I just notice as I get closer to it and I see it more with you, and as you kind of bring your attention over into my world, and then you bring that way of gathering things together into what I'm expressing about my life, I'm getting the benefits of this insightfulness that you're seeing, where you're seeing things that like I've been experiencing for years. And I'm like, oh, there's it was.
I very much can relate to that. And there's also, to name that too, an irritation factor that I'm aware of, that I don't know how to hold this together. It's kind of, there's a friction point that is exciting, but threatening in the same way, because I don't know how to hold this. I find it very intriguing how to hold it, but there's also very much a sense I don't know how to, like I have to maneuver between one and the other, because it has not found its integration.
Yeah, totally.
Which is exciting and threatening at the same time.
It sounds like exactly where you like being.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was thinking about this. If we say like if we say something like the I thou, and we were to put a hyphen between the I and the thou, in some way, wouldn't the wholeness be the hyphen?
The wholeness be the hyphen.
Because in some sense, Heidegger, I mean, on one level, all he was trying to do his whole life is articulate the hyphen, right, between all of his words, right? To speak the hyphen, it's like the hyphen itself. And I'm getting this sense of like this shift from uniqueness, the encounter with the thou, right? And its uniqueness, its otherness, right? And the I that arises with the thou, right? And that encounter. And this emphasis of like shifting emphasis to the whole, that they seem very, very, very connected and like really powerful. Like I can feel it, like I can feel an aliveness coming through me.
The way I see it, which is somehow different, is there's this I and the thou.
Yeah.
But there is also something that allows to see through eyes that hold all this together, where basically the I and the thou are looking from the same place. Yeah. That there's something. What comes to my mind, I have no idea if it really relates, is when Buber says that every real I-thou relationship has a relationship also to a third, which he calls God.
Yeah.
And that all of a sudden, my non being separated from that, or our not being separate from that, becomes visible in this.
Right. Yes.
That it doesn't take away from the I-thou, but there's something which we are not separate also from, becomes visible as being not separate from who one really is.
Right.
And that is this other dimension, without losing that there is also this I-thou as an integrated part of it. Because that makes us to very significant degree so human, the capacity to hold this.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And I would say, playing off on that, the capacity, what makes us human, right, is precisely in our capacity to hold this. And right in because of that capacity, our capacity to be oblivious to it as well, right, in this sense.
Say
like again. in the capacity to hold this, right, which is what I heard you say is part of what it is to be human, is to have a capacity to hold this. But in that very capacity, right, is also the capacity to be oblivious to it as well. So there's this kind of like, there's this way where this hiddenness, this concealed, this revealed, this place. But I'm really curious about, just in the sense about, I don't know if I've ever thought about it explicitly until this conversation with you, but something about what is the relationship as such, just between wholeness and uniqueness.
Mm-hmm.
There's that sense of, if we say uniqueness maybe is in the same ballpark as something like suchness, right? The particular suchness. And wholeness is something like moreness. I know John and Christopher have really developed this idea of bringing these two together. I wonder if we're talking about something similar. What do you think?
It will flow for me somehow different, because I see the suchness and the moreness in the individual, in the uniqueness. That there's a moreness in that too.
Yeah.
And there is also a suchness and a moreness in the wholeness.
Yeah.
Because there is also in the wholeness both dimension of such and more.
Right.
That in itself is the emergent process. That's wholeness emerging.
Yeah.
But it holds both dimensions, and it's held by that, because there's something, and maybe that's too philosophical, but that is partly how I see it in this uniqueness, particularly in this human uniqueness.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's this particular capacity of choice.
Mm. So uniqueness and the capacity of choice.
The choice to be there for this is in my uniqueness. There's a whole dimension opening up in our capacity to individuate. There's a certain dimension of freedom that is only coming from our capacity to individuate.
Yeah.
Because we can embrace wholeness. We are not just basically thrown into wholeness.
Yeah.
As we are just thrown into wholeness.
Yeah.
We are also thrown into wholeness, but we can basically separate from it. We have a choice to separate and say, no, I don't participate in wholeness.
Yeah.
But there's because of this capacity of choice, there is also the capacity to appreciate and choose it.
Yeah.
And that wholeness has changed because it's a chosen one.
Yeah, totally. And that choice is linked to the uniqueness.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And so there's a way, what I'm hearing you say is that in that uniqueness is actually what I'm hearing. Is it fair to say, is what you're saying, that uniqueness is perhaps what actually transpires when I choose the wholeness, and in the wholeness becoming aware of itself.
Yeah. But in a form of choice, and that's different, because that's my understanding also of a big part of Western philosophy, and here very much influenced, particular by German idealism,
right?
By Kant, Schelling, Fichte, where this capacity of developing this I, this absolute I, as the German idealism is basically, is that discovery of freedom.
Yeah.
Because it's this freedom point of that is developed in this Western philosophy,
right?
Which all responsibility and all kind of responsible participation takes care. It's different than indigenous non-separateness.
Yeah.
Where we are just indigenous separateness is not this form of choice.
Yeah.
Because it's just not individuated yet.
Yeah.
And there's something in our capacity of developing this extreme I sense that our Western culture has developed. Western metaphysics has developed. It brings us to a different level, but it also brings this whole separation of subject and object.
Yeah.
And to let go of that
without
losing the choice.
Yeah. Yes.
is a different form of wholeness.
Yeah. So I want to hang out with that for a second. So what I'm hearing you say or distinguish or proposing is this sense of that I can actually choose the wholeness without also having to bring together the baggage of the subject object.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm wondering if that starts to, hearing that, I'm starting to get a sense of what I'm imagining. I'm starting to hear Eckhart here, like Gelassenheit in this,
mm-hmm.
in some sense, this willing, right? Like being willing, not willing, mm-hmm. in that sense of allowing, mm-hmm. like mm-hmm. an allowing kind of sense about it, that that's a choice. Yeah, that's about as far as I can get with it, but like this kind of allowing sense.
The way I hear you and the way I interpret it is that there's a point. Usually, there's an opposition between will and surrender, or there's kind of I choose willingly or I surrender passively, but there's a way where these opposites become one, where this Gelassenheit is something that is consciously taken, but it's not that there's no individual doing this.
Yeah,
it's a let it be an ereignis.
Yeah,
and that's a deep spiritual capacity that also liberates something in culture.
Yeah,
which that opens up a complete different dimension. But the whole technicity, the instrumental relationship in the subject, the whole technological in framing,
standing
kind
reserve,
of holds that.
Right, totally. Yes. Yeah. In some senses, isn't it? It holds that. Yeah. So what we're talking about is not that.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. And again, just my interpretation. That's my understanding of Heidegger's search for a second beginning.
Yeah. Right.
That's how I understand it. When he's searching for the second beginning, it's the capacity for that.
Yeah.
Which, to bring that also, is a reopening of the sacred.
Yeah.
In that, so that's my understanding, and that's where I just feel deeply connected to as I read him in his longing of the second beginning, after the whole go through to basically technology being the end of metaphysics.
Right. And it's funny when he said his longing, I'm wondering is that, are you seeing his uniqueness?
I think so.
In the way that we're kind of talking about it, yeah.
The way I see that is I feel humanly very connected to Heidegger.
Yeah.
Because of a lot of things, also the tragic of his life, the tragic of his human failure, his involvement with the Nazis, and there's something where it sounds funny, I care a lot about Heidegger.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's maybe a hubris in that, but there's also a longing to liberate Heidegger.
Yeah. Huh. Interesting. So it sounds like
very much.
Is it fair to say that that's, in some sense, because that feels very personal to me. Like there's a real personal longing that you see in him, right? And for a lot of different reasons, right? You care about him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, totally. And in the way to care about him, it sounds like is, in some sense, is to liberate, is to continue his project in some way, right?
Exactly, because this caring about him has this personal, it's really personal the way I feel it. I feel very connected to him as a human being.
Right.
Of course, I've never met him in person. And there is also a different dimension to him that I see, that because of the tragic of his life, he kind of locked something of a human potential. He was, in my understanding, in the verge of opening something, and in the tragedy of his own failing, he locked it for humanity. It's basically, it became a minefield. I mean, in Germany, even more than in any other place, in academics, it's completely impossible to be really working with Heidegger. Because it's just
it's just treacherous.
It's burned soil. You don't go there.
Right.
That's all. That created fascism. Period.
Yeah.
And it's also true that there's the whole tragedy also of the German comic, the comic of German culture in this. So it has many layers. This.
Right.
The whole karma of also the power of German culture, talking about German idealism and all of that. And then basically the complete failure in the Holocaust. It created something. It created a huge stumbling block for humanity. That is just something that needs care.
Right. Oh, totally. So what I'm kind of hearing is that I can hear there's a way where it is. In some sense, are we finding ourselves in a way for you personally, right, where your work with the Emergent Dialogue and this perspective of this wholeness, right? And the thing that you're seeing encircling, which is like this kind of connection with a kind of an I thou sense, that in some sense there's a way that they're already both mutually connected to each other and you.
Interesting, because as you're saying this, something comes to me that I haven't thought this way, but it seems to be very obvious that this is the case. There's something about the wholeness and the appreciation of wholeness that's very much connected to the German spirit. Like Kant, Hegel, and Heidegger has it all. That in itself also can be very easily cold and forgetting the humanity, of the concreteness of the Tao.
Right.
But you can't get lost in the big picture.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah. And what I heard of that is the forgetting. What struck me with that is the forgetting. The forgetting doesn't imply its absence, right? Just that you can forget what's so, and then go forward as if in this sense the personal isn't important or something like that. Yet the remembering is, if to remember that is to remember that, oh, this is already been there as such, and we can
and there's a big healing in the acknowledgement that this Tao is already there, and it's part of that. It's the appreciation of the concreteness and uniqueness of every presence. That is deeply healing, but there's also something painful in acknowledging that. I'm now very much talking from this karmic context of let's call it wrong wholeness.
Wholeness that doesn't have, without the W in front.
Yes. And how to integrate that, and so there's something where I see the complementary as something that needs each other in this.
So like lots of different levels to this. It's interesting. I've never been to Germany. So I don't have any personal experience with this, but just this, it's interesting to hear you talk about, in some sense, that Heidegger's off limits.
Well, much more than in the US.
I was going to say here, it feels like, surprisingly, given all the political stuff, Heidegger is becoming more and more like who people are paying attention to. But in Germany, that's not the case.
Which brings me to the absurd situation that I'm reading literature about the fourfold in English because it's not written in German.
What a trip. What a trip.
Because it's toxic here. It's just toxic, also for rightful reasons. I mean, it's just karma is real. That's understandable. So, but it's really also not healed. And it's still very, very much alive in the way how German culture and also philosophical culture unfolds. In last years, even more so, when the black, how you call it, the black notebooks came out. There, it just became very obvious how Heidegger really had an anti-Semitic thinking. And it was not just something that he went out of career reasons with the Nazis, but he had an anti-Semitic side to himself. That really created another rift of basically Heidegger is dead. You don't touch him.
Wow. Is it kind of like, is it the sense that in Germany, and in this case with Heidegger in particular, when you say that's toxic, like in that sense of like, if we just put our finger in it, there's the threat of just becoming like that again? Is that the sense?
That's the story. which translates also, if you put the finger in that, you won't have an academic life here.
Yeah. Yeah. Huh. Well, so for you, God, that makes it just has me. I mean, I'll have to, I have a feeling I'll be thinking about this for a while. Well, I'm starting to appreciate the complexity, right? Of just when I put myself in your position, I don't know, in some way I can't quite put words to it, but I just get this sense of understanding like a little bit more about Germany's relationship to Heidegger, right?
Mm-hmm.
And your work, and seeing how much of it is very, very, very like the Emergent Dialogue. It sounds like it's very, very much almost explicitly, right, in some ways, like a Heideggerian practice in some sense. And just your personal connection to it, including the whole thing with Germany's relationship to that. I don't know. It's just like there's a lot there. I don't know. I'm just present to the allotness of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Hey, I have to get going here.
Yeah.
This has been really. This has been really, really great getting to know you.
Oh, thank you so much for making time. We would love to continue it somehow.
Yeah, let's continue it.
And see what can come out of this, because now even more so I have a sense how this can be something very fruitful.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, totally. Yeah, let's schedule another time to get together and dialogue, and we can go from there.
Yeah, let's do that. Great.
Nice to meet you, my friend.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.